All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first edition of the Source Technology LA Cyber Team podcast. Join us once a month here on Source Talks Podcast Network on LinkedIn and elsewhere, where myself and some other recruitment professionals will be breaking down challenges and future outlooks across a variety of industries from a staffing perspective. I'm Alex, your host for today's conversation. I'm joined here by Carl Matson and Matt Tisaro of No Name Security. Thank you very much, you guys, for joining me here today on our kind of inaugural / pilot episode. Carl and Matt have joined us here in the first edition of this new series, where we'll be ideally sitting down with CISOs and executives across the information security sector, sometimes in a roundtable setting, to chat about directions the industry is going, both in the context of talent and otherwise. We'll also have a great focus on diversity, equity, inclusion within this space, and we'll be digging into the main challenges and directions this industry is facing / going, both D&I related and otherwise. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Carl and Matt for a brief introduction. I'll start with you, Carl. I'd love to just hear, a brief introduction about yourself, what got you into security, and maybe what your current position and scope is.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. Carl Matson. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for No Name Security, a small security company born out of Israel about 2 years ago, and I joined as the CISO about 2 months ago. I started in the security field when I was young and enlisted in the Army, and I was instructed that I was an intelligence analyst as my assignment. And so that was sort of like winning the lottery ticket of military assignments, was being sent to work at NSA early in my career. And so I think I've just turned that early career opportunity into a career in the private sector. 10 years later, eventually CISO for a couple of financial institutions in California. And then just recently taking this kind of big career shift myself, working for a startup company. We're 150 people. So this is the smallest organization by far I've ever worked with in my life. And so it's a new experience for me.
Thanks, Carl.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Matt Tisaro. I started out life, I guess, as a developer, writing code for the my goodness, for Netscape and early IE, which was really kind of awful work, to be honest with you, but I did it. I moved to a place where I was managing, I didn't like the environment I was programming in, so I just started managing my own servers, and that's where I kind of caught the security bug, because now I had my server babies and I didn't want them to get popped. Moved from there into pen testing, did a ton of web app pen testing for several years in various consultancies, and then moved into internal kind of security for Rackspace and started the product security team there, and worked in several other places in the product security or application security group, mostly focused on automation as kind of been my shtick. And then as of this is week 2 with No Name Security as the Director of Security Evangelism.
My next question for you both, obviously, you both have very different journeys as far as your security careers. I'd love to hear what you thought maybe was the most challenging part to get you where you are now. And Carl, I'll just start with you to make it easy.
Well, I was an intel analyst for a few years, 6 years in the military, and I really was not. I had zero technical wherewithal other than being able to type reports. Yeah. And then I received an assignment where I was handed the keys to a data center and said, "You're in charge." And so for about 2 years, I had a team of administrators and engineers, contractors, and military personnel. And I had to fake being a data center director until I started to sort of get it right. So by far and away, that opportunity is sort of unique to the military, because in civilian life, you don't really give the keys to the kingdom to somebody who has no idea what they're doing. And to be perfectly honest, that does happen in the military, and I shifted as fast as possible. Hopefully by the end of the 2 years, I was reasonably competent. But that for me was the hurdle, was this skill gap. But the advantage of is I didn't have the option of not doing it. And so I just put my head down and charged through it and absorbed everything I could, because there was no walking away. I have a contract. It's an enlistment tour, and that's just the way it is. And so when there's no other option, that survival mode kicks in, and I adjusted accordingly. I don't know that I could deal with that sort of uncertainty or sort of lack of ability today as a civilian adult. I don't know that kind of ambiguity or confusion I could absorb, but when you're in the military, you don't really have a choice and you just adjust accordingly.
Yeah, terrific.
So for me, I guess it was really, I was always a very technical person. I like getting way deep down into the weeds. And in security, that's like kind of a good thing because a lot of these issues are super technical. But the thing that took me the longest time to kind of grok, and I really didn't even realize I didn't have this till I started hiring interns and realizing they didn't get this, was the fact that the context of the security issue is kind of everything, right? So SQL injection, right? That's a bad thing. I can do arbitrary stuff against the database. Database is where all the crown jewels are. That's bad, right? On the surface, that's a terrible thing. But like SQL injection on the application that lets me book rooms in one of our offices of Big Corp, it's kind of annoying. We should probably fix it, but I'm not going to like throw up the warning lights. SQL injection in www.bigcorp.com's website. OMG, yeah, that's like pull the Andon cord and start an urgent issue, right? So it took me the longest time to realize that sometimes these technically really awful things aren't business awful things. And that kind of context was just hard to get. And I've noticed that in hiring junior people now that I've gotten a little bit less junior over the years, is get that idea of context. Like security issues, technically, yeah, they may be bad, but the context in which that badness is very, very important.
Got it. Terrific. Thank you both. I think my next main question just has to do with the industry as a whole. Obviously, security and the internet in general are changing so rapidly. I think, even the CISO title wasn't even really a thing 15, 20 years ago. I don't think I've ever had a conversation with a second generation CISO. I don't know if I will for another 10, 15 years, just because of how new and how rapidly growing the industry is. What do you guys think is maybe one or two of your largest challenges in the information security space? Obviously, no name and API security focused business has their own kind of focus, but overall, what do you think? Or maybe one or two really, really big challenges with where things are right now?
Well, I think it starts with understanding how to position the spending on cybersecurity in such a way that the organization has a confidence level that that's the right amount of money. Whether you're a 100-person team or 100-person company or 100,000 person company, it's very much still an art to describe to the folks who do write the checks in terms of staffing and technologies, et cetera, exactly how much security is worth from like a business value perspective. So that challenge of like risk, risk avoidance spend or how much do we spend on remediation? How hygienic is hygienic enough? That's kind of an existential question that every security team faces. It's a huge challenge because it leads to a situation where both business executives and security executives sometimes only have anecdotes to lean on as to whether enough is enough. So anecdotes such as is my user experience with login efficient and useful, or have I blocked business activity accidentally with a control that would otherwise be a good idea? And so those are the anecdotes that stick in people's mind. And so for security teams, it's difficult necessarily to navigate that conversation with how much investment really is warranted, because I think universally business executives know that cyber risk is real. There's no one is ever saying that cyber risk isn't there. But is it 1% of IT spend? Is it 10% of IT spend? Is it 50% of IT spend? That's a very, very tough question to answer, even for the most sophisticated organizations, as to how much tolerance can we live with, how many loose ends, how much lack of hygiene, what pursuit is the target state? That's hard.
And I completely agree with what Carl said. I never really had that perspective in a career position. I was a little more tactical, I guess, in the application security field. But the other thing that really goes in hand to hand with what Carl said is the speed. And then I've never seen a security team, and I don't think I will ever see a security team that is bigger than the rest of the org. Right?
Yeah.
Like even in security companies, like the security team isn't as big as the rest of the org because there's a lot of other things that need to happen to make a company happen. So trying to optimize the head count that you have to get the most work done is really crucial. And driving it, for me anyway, driving out the mundane and the routine stuff so that I can have the human brains doing human brain work is very, very important.
Got it. Terrific. Maybe to transition onto some of the stuff we're already talking about with budgets and headcount, what do you guys think are two of the biggest challenges maybe in sourcing talent in information security and making sure that you're working with the best people? What are some challenges there that you've seen in your history?
Well, it's certainly difficult to ascertain, even with certainty, at least, how a human is going to perform in a new environment, and that includes their technical skills and their human skills of interpersonal relationships. So to the degree that we can have some diagnostic about whether the technical fit or whether the personality or the cultural fit is there, it's still very much a leap of faith on both ends. That once you get into at a company, 30 days, 90 days, 1 year. That's really when you start to know whether a person's skills and whether their cultural fit is real. So it's a bit of a leap of faith at the beginning that there's a good match.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the other something too is patience, and a lot of times will pay off, but you have to have it. Having brought in several junior people into my org, the ability to have the patience to sort of let them get up to speed. The payoffs can be huge. There's one fellow who had done no pen testing that I taught to pen test while I was at Rackspace, who now is the head of a pen testing group at a large bank, right? Like, I had to be patient with him though. When he first started, he really kind of knew nothing, but I pointed him in the right direction and gave him some stuff to go do, and he did it and proved he was, eager and willing. So but I also didn't have a fully productive employee for a good period of time, right? So it took him a while to ramp up, but once he was there, he's golden.
Yeah.
One thing
go ahead.
I would add to just a side note, another challenge with talent management and cybersecurity is that managing cybersecurity talent is hard for a particular reason, which is it's difficult to be in a career field that has like limited inherent rewards. A day without a breach is like good enough. And so as managers, we have to be very conscious and go out of our way to provide feedback, to give recognition, those types of things, like in comparison to, let's say, a sales position where like your feedback loop of your performance is your commission. And so there's kind of like there's an immediate payback for success in your career. In cybersecurity, there's no immediate payback. It's just, we didn't get breached today. Like, awesome. So we do have to like kind of not make up, but we sort of have to make up ways of recognizing talent and having those conversations about performance. And I think especially like in a remote work world, it's very easy for an employee in cybersecurity to not feel valued or integrated. There's a lot of different ways that cybersecurity managers have to go above and beyond to maintain a sense of connection with their team. And so retention is difficult in our field for a variety of reasons, but I think that's one of them.
How have you guys in the past ensured or focused on like making sure that your information security teams are diverse and equitable to other people? Where have the focus has been as far as hiring talent that you think is diverse?
Well, I think for me, it starts with like looking at job descriptions, and I can tell you with certainty that I've only ever been like at best 50% qualified for the jobs that I've taken.
Yeah.
And so I think each time that I've been given an opportunity, I've felt fortunate because somebody saw something in me that says like, well, that person isn't perfect, but we're going to coach them up. And so I think like, especially when it comes to like the job descriptions I commonly see in information security, they show things like 6 years experience, or has to have a CISP, or has to have a CEH, and these certifications. And the reality is like the talent is not closely correlated oftentimes with what your past was. It's closely correlated to like where your attitude is and where you're going. And so I think that cybersecurity hiring managers need to be need to be flexible, because there are not a lot of people out there with 10 years experience. And so what we need to do is we need to open we have to welcome willing and talented people who maybe are just entering the field. And I think that has been a challenge. It becomes sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy for cybersecurity. If the only people we're hiring are those with 10 years experience, then it's going to be the same people we hired 10 years ago. And so we have to get out of that and hire hire and coach and build the diversity ourselves rather than expect it to have happened 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think what you're saying about the barriers of entry can be quite difficult, and definitely, has to do with the fact that this field might not be as diverse as it could be, and especially for a group like women or a group like veterans, like those barriers are quite difficult to overcome.
Yep.
And so, recognizing it, of course, is the first most important thing. That breaking down those barriers is important. Educating yourself, and I and Source, of course, are quite interested in those kind of barriers. So that's why I asked the question. I'm curious, Matt, if you have any insight.
I haven't done I've been involved in hiring, but not the hiring manager in a lot of cases. I will say I did the most kind of interviewing at RAC, and I have to give credit to the HR. They were basically a pre-filter. They did a very good job of bringing us a diverse set of candidates, and we had a mix. We had a pretty good mix of people on the product security team. And I honestly, if you were eager, you were willing to learn, and you had enough technical chops, you don't have to be a rocket scientist, but I just need you to be roughly skilled, right? If you can get there, you're in. And I liked interviewing with questions that were less about like very silly technical nuances and more about how do you think. Present a situation. Here is the way that I would draw on a whiteboard. Here's the architecture of our X cloud product. You were asked to evaluate the security of this. What are the questions you'd have asked the dev teams? Completely wide open, but it gave me a great chance to see their thinking process, which honestly is the most important thing over any other aspect, their gender, their color, their whatever. I don't really care. I want somebody who can think creatively and understands roughly the technology, and the rest they'll learn. I mean, I didn't come to this field fully caught up on all the things. I just did it as I went. That's how everybody does it.
There's a company that I think kind of embodies the value of diversity in a practical way, and that's Estee Lauder. So the Estee Lauder cybersecurity leadership team is led by some exceptional female executives in cybersecurity. And previously, when I worked as a manager at Target, I found the same thing, which is companies have made choices to have their employee base represent the perspectives of their customers. Who better to represent the interest of the customer than a team of IT and security professionals who actually are same. They reflect those values, they reflect those perspectives. And so I think there's a few companies that I think have really hit that center target of building a team internally to their organization that's composed of that customer perspective. And so I see that every time in retail, and it works. It works when you build a team that represents the sensibility of your customers. And so, for all of us, if we were Estee Lauder and we had a security team of 55 white guys between the ages of 28 and 45, probably we're not making rational risk trade-off decisions in the interest of Estee Lauder and their customers. I just use it as an example of that's why this is good. It works to have your customers' business sort of hat on once in a while to what their values are and what their sensibilities are.
Definitely. I appreciate that, Carl. I think that's a great answer. Kind of similar question, specifically tailored to veterans. Carl, how do you think, I'm trying to phrase my question, I guess, but what do you think the easiest way for veterans to break into a field like cybersecurity is, or, what does that actually look like to you as far as breaking into?
A couple thoughts. The first is I had the huge advantage of coming out of the military with a security clearance. And so as I immediately exited the military, I was looking to capitalize on that security clearance. And the unintended consequence of that is it dramatically limited my options in the commercial sector, because I wanted to keep it. I wanted to hang on to that security clearance for dear life. So the first thing I would suggest is for like long-term career, yes, a security clearance job with a contractor might pay 20% more, but I think it's detrimental for a person's long-term career to make a decision based on the possession of a clearance. We have to get over it someday. And it took me a couple years to get over my clearance, but when I did, my career really took off because I was no longer limited to this tiny subset of the commercial world that I could work in. Then the second thing is I think that the folks who are departing the military today don't anymore have the advantage of technical capabilities or skills that are kind of above the private sector. So I'd say 15 years ago, it probably was true that the military and defense like technology systems were advanced in a way that the private sector had not caught up. Now, when I look at where we are today as like, let's say it's like public cloud infrastructure, microservices applications, the things that are happening in cybersecurity in the private sector are probably pretty far ahead of the DoD. So I think that folks coming out of the military should really consider some sort of reskill, retool around software development and around like cloud technologies, because they have their use in the government, but it's not quite the same way as a person coming out of the Army is very unlikely to be like a highly proficient developer who can go work at Twitter tomorrow. And so I think that they should consider the reskilling as a first step to come out, because there are not a lot of satellite comms people anymore. That's what I was. But back in the day, that was valuable, but it's not really that valuable anymore. So there's a reskilling.
I'm curious if you guys have any topics or questions for me or for each other that you'd want to bring up. Like I mentioned, this is our first episode, so kind of a pilot here. Yeah.
Actually, I want to add one thing to what I shared before about veterans separating.
Yeah, please.
And Matt, I'm gonna be your like a billboard for your career for a second. Matt's done years of work aside from his corporate gig, leading projects in OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project. And OWASP is a good example of a couple of organizations we have in the security field, which are sort of unpaid member contributed projects. And those projects are always available to everybody to participate in, to contribute to at all skill levels. And so for somebody who's wondering, how do I, break into a career in cybersecurity, or how do I reskill? OWASP is exactly the kind of community that wants and needs you. And no, it's not paid, but it is a spectacular experience. And the whole point of it is to foster a community of professionals. And so I just wanted to put the call out there, like OWASP is just one of several organizations that a person can build a heck of a resume out of projects that they never get paid for, but have huge value. And like me as a hiring manager, when Matt and I, first talked, it's really Matt's OWASP projects that I think were the most attractive kind of attribute of his background. And I think that's true for everybody, that opportunity is there. Alex, I just maybe would ask if you could share any advice for hiring managers in terms of, you've been in the field for a while, and the talent landscape has shifted in the last year and a half. So what do you see companies doing wrong, or what are the companies that are succeeding right now at bringing people aboard? What are they doing right?
I think the biggest thing I've seen as far as what they're doing wrong, we mentioned it a little bit before, but job descriptions, I think fundamentally can be very frustrating to work through, both from a recruiter's perspective and from, I'm sure, candidates' perspective. I'm sure you guys saw, it went viral on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago. There was a job description that was asking for like 15 years of Kubernetes experience, and it hasn't even existed for that long. It's stuff like that I think, and it's not even to hiring managers' fault sometimes, just because they're not highly technical in certain fields. They just don't necessarily know. And so I think hiring managers, recruiters, people in the talent and staffing industry need to do their best to educate themselves on the technical side of what they're hiring for. And I think a lot of candidates that I've talked to have been really frustrated when they get into an interview before the technical side with, a person pre-screening them. And a lot of the times they just can't ask the questions that they want to, because the pre-screener or the hiring manager just doesn't have that technical knowledge. So I think For myself, obviously, I'm not a cybersecurity professional, but because I've been in this space so long, I at least understand the kind of things to ask and to work through. So I think those are the fundamental issues I see. And then on the flip side, what they're doing right is essentially what they're not doing wrong in that same sense. Like people that educate themselves on the technical side of what they're hiring for is really the most important thing, I think, for traditional hiring managers and traditional HR teams. Obviously, for you guys, you're in a hiring manager, spot yourselves. So it's most of the time handled there. But does that answer your question? I feel like I rambled on there a little bit, but
yeah, and could you even expand, I guess, work from office, work from home dynamics? What do you hear from candidates and versus what you're hearing from the employer side?
Definitely. I think about 75% of the candidates that I speak with are in the boat of, I never want to see an office again, or at least are wanting to be pretty much full-time remote. A lot of people are open to travel, going into the office once a month. But so that's kind of the percentage that I've seen of people that I'm talking to that want to really only work remote. There's very few that are only set on going to the office again. And on the flip side, with clients we're working with and other people we're talking to, I'd say only like 40 to 50% of the clients we're working with are really open to that full remote setting or a hybrid setting. So obviously there's a discrepancy there. And I think some places might get burned on talent just because there's so many people that are looking to remain remote. And obviously, since the start of the pandemic, these things are changing quite rapidly. So that's what I'm seeing recently, especially in the cybersecurity space.
Well, fantastic. Well, No Name is a completely work from home company. So if anybody listening is interested,
yep, there you go.
We were a company that perhaps fortunately was sort of born during COVID. So all of us started remote, and of course we're designed as a company to be decentralized. Companies that have a centralized DNA to them are, I guess, of varying degrees adapting.
Yeah, I think those kind of companies are going to be very successful, not only in their own endeavors, but also in sourcing talent. So, like I said, those are all the main questions I've got. This is obviously going to be a growing podcast, and I want to be able to come on with you guys again and some other people across the industry. So unless you guys have anything else you'd want to bring up, I think that's kind of it. Thanks everyone for joining us here. Thanks to you two, especially for our first episode of this new series. It was great to hear from you some of the great work you've done in the industry and some of your experience. And so, yeah, I think for anyone else listening, looking ahead, we'll be putting out a podcast in the series, I think once a month, and we'll hopefully be able to add more and more senior leaders to this network to create more of a roundtable experience. And that's about it. Any last remarks from you two?
Go ahead, Matt.
I'm just glad to be here. I've always enjoyed talking to people. I've done trainings before, and I've had one. I couldn't believe this. One of my students asked me, like, "Why are you training me to do your job?" I'm like, "Are you kidding me? There's no end of work. I could train this room full of people every day for 6 months, and there still wouldn't be enough people." So I found, at least in my experience, the security community to be very open and sharing, which is fantastic. There isn't any kind of secret squirrel I can't tell you about it. Maybe with, vague references where they might not give you company specifics, but they'll give you the generalities. So I'm always happy to share with people and bring people into the field, because we just need people.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's a good thing to bring up. I think those are all the questions I got. I've appreciated all of your insight. I'm just going to stop the recording and then we can chat here. But everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. Please come back. We'll be trying to do this kind of thing with people like Carl and Matt once a month or so. And I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.